Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest involved in science, technology, medicine, creating a better tomorrow and a safer tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined on the show by Dr. Casey Perley, who is Executive Director of the Army Applications Laboratory. There, she leads their mission to ultimately reshape how the Army works with industry, to ultimately provide the best tech in the world to the best Army in the world. And her vision is ultimately to work from problem inception to sustainment, hand in glove with stakeholders across the Army and the Department of War, ultimately to accelerate and access the Army's ability to ingest novel innovation. Dr. Perley previously served as the Deputy Director of AAL, and before that as their first Director of Insights and Analysis, where their scientists and entrepreneurs collaborate to bring the best companies and technologies together. Prior to AAL, Dr. Perley was a postdoc fellow actually at USAMRIID, where she was managing research projects across a wide range of topics and stakeholders, including designing DNA vaccines, working in the lab with biothreats like Ebola and Hanta. She holds a PhD in Molecular Genetics and Microbiology from Duke, did her undergraduate work in Molecular Biophysics and Biochemistry from Yale. And when she's not thinking about all that, she's also an extremely accomplished harpist, and she has something like 120 recordings out there, a couple that were nominated for Grammy Awards, so we'll be getting into that as well. A lot to get into. Really excited to have with us Dr. Casey Perley. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited getting into so many different topics with you today, because you've done a lot of cool things, the last several years, and looking to hear about it all. I'd love to start off, like we typically do, handing you the floor for a couple minutes just to talk a little bit more about you, sort of the early days, where you grew up, a little bit of your background, and sort of maybe you could take us, even before PhD and before all the nasty bugs that you were working with at that time, take us into some of your early anti-cancer research, because it's kind of an area that I played around in myself. Not just anti-cancer work, but you were evaluating natural products and heat shock proteins and all sorts of other cool things. What got you interested in biophysics and anti-cancer work? Really fascinating on its own.
So, I was a kid, and my mom likes to tell this story that when I was like 3 years old, I took a microscope to a tea party so I could look at the tea under the microscope. And that was maybe a sign of the direction that my career was going to go. I was really fortunate to go to this incredible all-girls high school in Buffalo, New York, called Buffalo Seminary. And all of my math teachers and my science teachers were women, some of whom had PhDs, some of whom had done projects for NASA. So growing up, there was never this idea that a girl couldn't go into science, or that there were certain things I couldn't do in science. It was always like, well, they've all done it. Why can't I? When I got to college, I knew that I loved biology. That's where my heart lay. But chemistry is pretty cool. Physics is pretty cool. Math is pretty cool. And I wasn't quite ready to give up on those. So being a molecular biophysics and biochemistry major, I was able to kind of chart my own course through biology. I wasn't mandated to take ecology or reproductive biology or anything, but I had to take a lot of chemistry and physics and math, so it seemed like a great choice. One of the coolest things about that major that I didn't appreciate as a freshman, but I appreciated as I got into my graduate work, is it was far more focused on teaching you how to think like a scientist than teaching you how to memorize. So the example I always give is if you were a regular biology major, you'd have a quiz at some point that's here's the Krebs cycle, right? Here's a blank piece of paper, draw it. Like, I want to know that you have memorized the Krebs cycle. My tests were like, here's a drawing of the Krebs cycle. If we mutated this enzyme, what would the resulting product be and what would the effect be on a cell? Here's some mock data. Which operon is active in the bacteria and what does that tell you? So it was far more about learning to think, learning how to like read data, analyze scientific method than just straight bio, which absolutely amazing. I had grown up, my mom is a special education teacher. She ran an early intervention preschool, managed speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy services for kids. So in college, I did a lot of work on neuroscience, molecular basis of learning and memory, because I was at the time and remained fascinated by how our brain works, learning disabilities, you know, things like Tourette's syndrome. What is going on neurologically that is causing that? How can we help treat it? How can we help mitigate it if treating isn't possible? And I was really fortunate enough to get to do about 2 years worth of work on that. I did, however, learn something very valuable about myself, which is that in neuroscience, when you're doing experimentation with animals, you cannot give them sedatives or anesthetic prior to euthanasia because it can change the protein chemistry of the brain. So I've euthanized a lot of animals over the course of my research. I prefer to do it with anesthetic as opposed to other mechanisms. As an undergrad, I was not asked to do that. As a grad student, I would be. So I was like, I can't do neuroscience. I'm out. I'm out. At the time, I also took a really cool class, I think right before my senior year, called like Pandemics in Early Modern Society. It was like a history of, Justinian plague. And as a kind of throwaway, the teacher said, there's this really cool book called The Hot Zone. Y'all should go read it. Like, it's not on the syllabus. I said, okay. Yeah. Summer before my senior year, I was working in my undergrad lab, and every Friday I'd go to Barnes & Noble and buy 2 books for the week. And I saw The Hot Zone on an end cap one week, and I was like, yeah, that got recommended to me. I'll read that. That changed my life because I suddenly realized, oh, that is the biology I want to do. And that is the biology I want to do because there are still so many big unanswered questions. Yeah. If you're studying E. coli, if you're studying polio, if you're studying chickenpox, all really important things, those are decently easy to study. We've studied them for a long time. We know what cells they infect. We know how our immune system reacts. But for things like hemorrhagic fever viruses, they're so new or they're so hard to work with, we don't know the first infected cell. We don't know what is causing your immune system to overreact. So I said, that's what I want to do. I decided to take a gap year between undergrad and grad school just to make sure I liked being a scientist before I committed like 6 years of my life to the emotional event that is a PhD. And I was fortunate enough to work as a research tech in Sue Lindquist's lab at MIT. And I worked for this incredible postdoc who was working on natural compounds to fight cancer, working on things like, how that can affect heat shock protein. And we had this massive data set. And one of us had to figure out how to learn how to code in R and do bioinformatics. And I drew the short straw. So I spent a year learning how to code. It took me 4 days to learn how to open a file in R. I threatened my computer with being thrown out of a window quite a lot. But at the end of the day, we were able to find a lot of really cool, promising targets in the data set and also able to kind of look for some heat shock protein associated biomarkers in rare cancers, which was really, really cool. But the whole time I was doing that work, it was really in service of going to get a microbiology PhD, which I was fortunate enough to go get at Duke.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love the story. I mean, heat shock proteins and protein homeostasis are so hot nowadays, but then natural products as well. I mean, I love that on its own just because it was the basis of majority of all the drugs that came out of, the pharmaceutical industry in the 20th century. So I personally love that work. So just it's really cool. And, I'm pleased.
I was going to say, my favorite fun fact that came out of that was actually I learned how to code in R. And now, to this day, we still code the AAL heat map of where all of our companies are found. We still use R because it's the heat map that I grew up loving. And they can't convince me that any other form is better.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I mean, then we get to 2015. You've been working on your PhD, you publish. It's on Mycobacterium tuberculosis and surface-binding antibodies and how that all influences early infection. And obviously TB, a major. I mean, we don't think about it, but look at that list of infectious agents, and it's still up there at number one. Haven't had to do
TB is a
anything.
problem.
Yeah, it's a
TB is a
problem.
problem.
It's a problem, and our vaccine is from over 100 years ago, but that's for another story. But bridge us a little bit. I mean, talk a little bit about work. Extremely important.
Yeah.
A major microbe that's a big problem still nowadays in 2026. But then you go into your postdoc work, and as you're saying, hemorrhagic fever, the really nasty BSL-4 stuff in terms of Ebola, in terms of hantavirus. You go work with Jay Hooper, who we had on the show about 2 years ago at USAMRIID. Tell us some stories. Whatever you can tell us about. Tell us some cool stuff you were doing there with the nasty
Yeah.
ones.
So knowing I wanted to ultimately work on hemorrhagic fever viruses, unfortunately, at the time, there wasn't a place you could go do your PhD and go into BSL-4. BU was just coming online, but even then, I don't think they were going to let grad students into the facility. So I was like, well, I got to go somewhere else, and I've got to hope that my doctoral work is enough to get me into those labs. I was fortunate enough to join Rich Rothingham's lab at Duke. We worked on tuberculosis, but I also got to dabble with things like plague and tularemia. What drew me to TB was, even though it's a very old pathogen, even though it's a disease everybody's heard of, there's still a whole lot we don't know about how it evades the immune system. And we actually don't know the first cell it infects. People will tell you, oh, it's this, oh, it's that, but there's actually no literature that proved it. So I was like, all right, big questions are still here, let's go. Our theory, so the challenge with TB, right, is that it only takes one microbe to infect you. So oftentimes when you're talking about other infectious diseases, you have infectious doses of hundreds or thousands.
Mm-hmm.
One for TB. So this is a massive challenge, right? And it likes to hide in our white blood cells. So once it's in, it's a real challenge to get out. And, historically, everybody's thought, let's look at T cells, let's do let's look at that part of the immune system to try to combat TB. We said, well, what if we made antibodies against the surface? Could you theoretically flood the lung with enough of those that you could prevent infection?
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a lot of time doing that. And it's the classic science story of like all the early studies are looking good. Hey, there are some people, but not a lot, that make these antibodies. Okay, we can isolate them. We can demonstrate that they bind. When we pre-mix them and then infect mice, we can show that there's a much lower disease burden.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to do the big experiment. We're going to preload mice with these antibodies in their lungs, and then we're going to give them an ultra low dose aerosol, and we're going to see if it can prevent infection. Spoiler, it can't.
Yep.
We got all the way to like the pivotal study, right? And then it was such a letdown. I mean, in many ways, this is good data. This is good to know. I'm glad I did the work, but it was very much like we were either going to have like the hit of the century or absolutely nothing. And we ended up on the latter. I was also really fortunate enough to work with a lot of really fantastic veterinary technicians and lab technicians that taught me a ton about doing animal models. And I'd been given some really good advice. When it comes time to do your postdoc, you want to keep some things the same and you want to change some things up. So for me, I was like, I want to keep doing animal models, keep allowing me to ask these really big questions, but I think I'm going to leave bacteria. I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to do viruses. I'm going to make that big play, try to go into BSL-4, try to work on the hemorrhagic fever viruses that were in the hot zone that drove me on this path. In grad school, I married a U.S. Army soldier.
Okay.
So that adds some complications to being a scientist in that the Army likes to move him every 2 to 3 years. And the places the Army likes to send its infantry officers are not always the places that have biosafety level 4 laboratories. Luckily, though, he was coming to a point in his career where going to Washington, D.C. was a logical next step. So he was actually deployed to Iraq. He attended my thesis defense via Skype. I think I put him to sleep, although he'll never admit to it. And if that happened, it was totally my fault, not his. And I moved ahead. I got a postdoc at USAMRIID. And I said, I hope you get a job in DC because I'm going. sold the house, did all the things. He came back from his deployment and was lucky enough to get a job in DC. And I spent a little over 3 years at USAMRIID working for Jay Hooper. So like incredibly full circle moment that he and I are both on the same podcast. He was a fantastic mentor. And yeah, I finally got to do the thing that I had, gone to grad school to do. And also in a very cool moment, I got to email that professor and say, hey, you don't remember me. It was a 300-person lecture class. I did nothing to stand out, but I want to let you know that one of your comments changed my life. I went and I read the hot zone. And as you can see by this email, I'm now at USAMRIID working on hemorrhagic fever viruses. So thank you very much. And got a lovely note back from him, and he was very touched. So yeah, that's how I ended up at USAMRIID. It was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really, really, really cool. And from there, enter the Army Applications Laboratory. Take us, before we get into sort of a lot of how the process works and some of the different programs and drill down on those, take us through a little bit of the hierarchy here, because you're not at the Pentagon. You're not even in the East Coast. You're down in Austin, Texas, a hotbed of all things, technology, innovation, defense tech also. I know there used to be something called Army Futures Command, which is now something known as Army Transformation and Training Command. And within that, you exist as Army Application Laboratory, but there's also Army Research Lab, DevCom, and we've had some folks on from there. Take us to what the organization is, where you are, and why you're in Austin, of course, and just a little bit of your current role. And then from there, we'll drill down on how it works and some of the cool things you've been doing.
Absolutely. So it's a bit of a bridge. Had a great postdoc, did all the cool things, worked with animals, was answering big questions. But you can sense that there's a but coming. And there were two but comings. One, I married a soldier, and he was lucky enough to be asked to command a battalion, which is a group of 700 men and women at Fort Hood. And, I married him, so I like him, which meant either we were going to have to live apart or I was going to move to Texas, which did not have a biosafety level 4 near Fort Hood. I also learned at USAMRIID that I liked a little bit more immediacy to my science. They're doing incredible work there, but designing vaccines, designing therapeutics can be years, right? I think everybody's a little bit spoiled for COVID, where the funding allowed us to do a lot of things in parallel to get that vaccine out quickly. But that's not the case for a lot of other rare diseases. You're still doing things sequentially. And I just was faced with this kind of existential question of like, what if I spend, longer than my doctoral work? What if I spend 10 to 15 years on something, it doesn't work? What do I have to show for it? Maybe I want something a little bit more rapid. So when Neil moved, Army Futures Command had just stood up here in Austin, and I heard they were hiring scientists. And I heard there was this thing called Army Applications Laboratory, which was all about, working with industry, working with, non-traditional technology and trying to pivot in. So I called them and I said, hey, I hear you are looking for scientists. I am one. Clueless how federal hiring worked, clueless about all of that. And they said, we're hiring engineers. And I said, that's a valid point. However, I have done internal ethics review boards. I've done IRBs, I've done ethics protocols. If you ever want to experiment on a soldier, you're going to have to go through the Army's IRB board. And you're not going to find an engineer that knows how to do that. I can do that for you. And they said, you know what? You're right. You're hired. And 5 years and 5 jobs later, I became the director, having done 0 IRBs. Turned out we never actually needed them. Although one time I did use my expertise to tell the team it wasn't needed. But that was the extent of like my argument with which I sold myself to the original leadership of AAL. Turns out we didn't need it. So AAL's mission is to get the best technology in the hands of warfighters as quickly as possible. There's a whole host of people who want to do that, from the research labs you mentioned to our partners on the acquisition side of the Army and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. They're great. Our niche in this space is that we do this by expanding the Army's access to our civil innovation base, specifically non-traditional industry. And this is so incredibly important because, for one, the civil innovation base of the U.S. and our allies is a strategic advantage over near-peer competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Second, the capabilities our Army increasingly needs: AI, cyber, robotics. That's maturing fastest in the commercial space, where there are really robust consumer feedback loops that we sometimes struggle to recreate in the Army. And third, 60 years ago, 2/3 of all R&D spending in this country was government funded. Today it is 20% and continuing to decline. With defense budgets being relatively static with respect to inflation, but our wish list of capabilities increasing, based on the lessons we're learning from the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, even if we wanted to, we can't afford to develop everything from scratch. We've got
Mm-hmm.
to figure out how to leverage all of that great commercial money. But those companies are not built like GD Land Systems, are not built like Boeing or Lockheed, Hanwha. They are built around consumer go-to-market timelines. So
Yeah.
we have to figure out how to work with them. And that is what AAL does. In the first 7 years of our life, we were under Army Futures Command. But as you mentioned, there was a great big merger, creating a new organization this past October. So Army Futures Command, Training and Doctrine Command, and U.S. Army Recruiting Commands all joined forces in this brand new command called Transformation and Training Command. You also mentioned we're not on the East Coast, and that is by design. One of the biggest things that the team that stood up AAL wanted to do was not have us behind wire. We are designed to be accessible, and that means we sit in a commercial accelerator here in Austin, Texas. You can theoretically walk in off the street and contact us. We hold open office hours, all of that sort of thing. The goal is it doesn't feel weird to come talk to us. It feels like you're talking to another potential investor or another collaborator. That's why I wear a leather jacket and jeans and boots to work every day. It's why our soldiers typically do not wear their uniforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're here to be part of the community. Austin is a great place to do this. It's in the
Sure.
top 10 in the country in terms of the amount of venture capital funding that pours into companies headquartered in the city. And it's actually number 2 in terms of hardware, if you're looking at numbers from last year. There is certainly software associated with defense tech, but a lot of what we do, especially at AAL, is, has a hardware component to it. So we now remain under Transformation and Training Command. We are a direct report unit to that headquarters, but we are also in direct support of this new entity called the PIT that was stood up on the Army acquisition side of the house to try to rapidly get capabilities to soldiers, rapidly prototype, do that initial kind of first tranche buy. So we're just kind of now learning how to navigate that relationship, but I'm really excited for what it's going to bring. And I think it's a really unique place for an innovation organization to be. Under T2Com, we have access to people who write requirement documents, which are
Mm-hmm.
required to make programs of record, which is the contract everybody ultimately wants to get. But we also have ties to the acquisition community through the PIT. And we've got ties to experimentation in soldiers and all of our national training centers, also through T2Com. So I'm really excited to see what the next couple of years bring as we learn how to put together all these resources to help bridge the valley of death for non-traditional
Mm-hmm.
companies.
That's awesome. And yeah, you bring up this important thing. I sort of, steal this phrase from your material, this tech readiness spectrum. So just in a,
Yes.
in principle, if we've done a lot of, for instance, DARPA episodes, DARPA a little earlier, in terms of the concepts and all that. So you're not necessarily going to be looking at that type of stuff. You're going to be looking where there's prototypes and operational demos, and we can get some field use pretty quickly because you really want to get the technology out there. Could you say a few words? I mean, if Secretary of War Pete Hegseth calls you up tomorrow and it's like, Casey, I wanted to, put a force field or something around armored personnel carriers. I'm making that up, of course, and maybe that's a little too early stage. But anyway, he wants something. Talk just a little bit about the process in this. I know you have these broad agency announcements for these applications. What's the typical process like when a new idea is like, when the Secretary of War calls you and it's like, help me this.
So the first thing I'm going to say is, what problem are you trying to solve?
Right.
The Army has this bad tendency of saying, I need this drone. And you're like, but what are you trying to do? Because there could be multiple ways of accomplishing that. One of my favorite stories from the early days of Army Applications Lab is we were trying to resupply field artillery in the field faster. And that's incredibly important because when an army is fighting, our field artillery shoots. I like to say it scoots because it rhymes. and then they resupply on that movement, and then they go to a second firing position and shoot again. So if you can speed up the resupply on that moving portion, you can actually get your second batch of rounds downrange faster. We all thought we were going to get like robotic arms and autonomous vehicles and like, the little robot that's just going to drive up to the back of the howitzer and put the ammunition in. We're really lucky that we wrote the solicitation super broad and we said anything that could help us do this. Because what ultimately made it to a program of record were inventory management solutions that allowed us to get rid of the paper and use computer vision to kind of seamlessly do the ammo portion, and it sped things up 30 to 40%. So the first thing I would say to him is, what problem are you trying to solve with a force field, right? Are you trying to protect tanks from incoming first-person drones? Or what are you trying to do?
Force fields are cool.
Right, exactly. So then we're going to take that problem and we're going to evaluate its military utility and its technical risk, right? This is how we kind of do problem ingestion. The problems we're looking for are things that are really high utility, things that could have major to decisive impacts on the battlefield, but the technical risk is low because commercial industry has already de-risked them. And the innovation is the military application of the capability. That said, there are some projects we see for really military specific capabilities in say, the munitions space, where it is very high utility, but also very high technical risk. And it's just never something commercial industry is going to de-risk because commercial industry does not need a low-cost cruise missile. And we do take those on as well. So then we go do market research. We assemble the team. Who are the soldiers that are going to do iterative design with us? Because it is one of the biggest lessons I've taken from the war in Ukraine is the interplay between their companies and their soldiers, and how embedded with units those companies are so that they can rapidly make changes, they can rapidly adapt to conditions on the battlefield. How do we mimic that within our own forces is something we've really spent the last 12 to 18 months trying to figure out. So to your point, yeah, we do typically work at a little higher TRL level. Things tend to come to us TRL 4, TRL 5. So you've almost got that like working min viable product to you have a working min viable product. And what we're going to do is we're going to get you the safety release. We're going to let soldiers operate it. They're going to tell you everything that's wrong with it. You're going to learn that communications, in a desert are very different than what you thought they were, and you're going to have to fix some things. So even if you come to us at a very high-tech readiness level, chances are it's going to drop like a stone really quickly once we send you out into an operational environment. But then we're going to help you build it up really quickly while consistently getting you reps with soldiers. So that's why end users always the first person on the team we're talking to. Who are the scientists we need? Who's the transition partner? Who's writing requirements? If this is a sensor that's going to go on a tank, that's a real Army specific thing. So I guess we're going it alone. But if it's like a new generator or a new building construction method, I'm going to walk across the hall and talk to the Air Force and the Navy and the Department of War and say, hey, anybody else have this problem? How have you solved it? Do you want to go in on this together? We do market research. We want to understand who are the best companies doing this. Are they domestic? Are they foreign? Are they small? Are they big? Are they non-traditional? Are they the primes? And then we put a solicitation out, right? And that's really the first time companies see that something's up. But if you imagine like a duck on the water, the whole couple weeks to couple months leading up to a solicitation drop where like the legs of the duck under the water frantically paddling that nobody sees to get everything lined up. So when we put a solicitation out, we have a couple of principles. Have you ever been on sam.gov, the website?
Yeah.
How was your user experience?
I haven't been on there for a while, but I have checked things out on there.
Okay.
So
usually the answer I get is people cringing or people laughing and maybe not wanting to admit that their user experience was not great. So we do a whole outreach campaign along with all of our solicitations. Social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, reaching out to chambers of commerce in areas that have like a high preponderance of these types of companies. Because our goal is companies can find out about opportunities as they go about their daily business. They don't have to like actively be looking to work with the DoD. We write all of this in plain language. Another fun early story is we got asked to build an autoloader for field artillery. And I think if I went to non-traditional industry and I said, build me an autoloader, I would have gotten exactly 0 responses. But what is an autoloader fundamentally? You're automating a process.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of companies that automate processes for Ford and Yoplait and Frito-Lay on their assembly lines who
Mm-hmm.
automate processes for oil rigs, which have a lot of shock and vibration. So we said, we just were looking to automate this process. And here's a webinar where we explain to you the whole field artillery loading process. So you don't have to have a field artillerist on your team to know how to do this. And we got a lot of Industry 4.0 companies who are like, I've never built an autoloader, but gosh darn, I can automate a process. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. Companies will submit. In general, we don't ever want more than 15 pages. Because if you can't tell me what you want to do and how you're going to spend money in 15 pages, I'm gravely concerned for your ability to tell me what you want to do. We'll then down select, and we run all of our companies through an adversarial capital due diligence check, just to make sure that they haven't taken money from, even unknowingly, from an adversary.
Sure.
We have certainly had companies that swore up and down they were clean and did not realize that their venture capitalist had some money from an adversary. Good news, we've never found something we've failed to mitigate. But that check happens, and then we rapidly get them on contract and we go. Typically, your kickoff meeting is going to be with the transition partners and or the end users right in front of you. Our goal is that you are experimenting with soldiers as quickly as possible. I don't care if you have a 3D printed mock-up of your capability. I'm going to take it to soldiers and have them tell you that the button is on the wrong side, or that form factor is not going to fit where you think it's going to fit on the vehicle, or gosh darn, that is way too heavy. Because I want you to know that and make those changes as a company earlier on versus doing it later where it's going to cost more time and money. A lot of our projects are what we call cohorts. So you're typically not coming in alone. A really great example of this is we got asked to solve some problems for the engineer community in the Army back in 2024. We ultimately put 7 companies on contract, all of whom had different components to help us autonomously breach and clear a minefield. And we put, I think, 6 companies on for companies that had the ability to shape terrain. So how can you deny enemy terrain or force them to turn really, really far in front of the forward line of troops? Those companies spent 3 months working with engineers from our schoolhouse, soldiers, requirements writers, transition partners, each other, figuring out how could their capability be used to solve these problems. And then we ultimately down selected to, I think, 8 of those companies to move on to the next phase, get a couple $1 million to build a min viable product. In May of this year, those companies went to Fort Leonard Wood and spent about a week with some of our engineer soldiers on what we call platoon sticks. It's your basic platoon training exercises. And what was really cool is we didn't say to the soldiers, all right, this is a hyperspectral imager and you will use it to detect mines. And this is a ground vehicle and you will use it to carry the thing. And that is a UAS and you will use it for ISR. We said, that's a UAS. It can do ISR. That's a ground vehicle. It can carry stuff. That's, whatever it was. You guys tell us. We didn't say this is for breaching, this is for terrain shaping. We said, you tell us how you would mix this together and with the stuff you usually have to solve these mission sets. How would you breach a minefield? How would you terrain shape? So for a week, day and night iterations, these companies were in the field making changes, zip tying or duct taping one company's capability to another. We had the safety releases so the soldiers were operating equipment. And what came out of that was not just an incredible week of learning for the companies, who got infinitely better feedback than they could have if we just, dropped them off in a motor pool at, say, Fort Hood. But the Army got to experiment with doctrine and organization and the types of training that our soldiers would need if these capabilities were ever dropped, into a unit. This was so successful that it was somebody called down to 3rd Corps and asked if their engineer brigade would be willing to continue to iterate with these capabilities for 9 months and then use them in support of a brigade train up en route to the National Training Center. And they've done just that. So in March, these 8 companies plus 2 more that have been added are going out into a major brigade validation exercise at Fort Hood. And what's so cool about it is because the unit has been training with them for so long, they're not going to be left behind as a decoy. They're not going to be, oh shoot, how do I do this? When you're under all the stress. They know. They've already planned how they're going to use them. And actually, if they told us, we don't think that capability is ready for prime time, we don't want to take it, we'd say, okay, that tells us everything we need to know. They're not ready yet. Right? And we're not going to force you to take it. So that's an example of what it can look like for a company that comes onto one of our projects.
No, it's an awesome example, and again, there's an AL performance report that's on your website now, and we'll put a link to this because it lists a lot of the ongoing active projects and the completed ones as well. And yeah, I mean, along these lines, I thought it'd be fun if we could just drill down on a couple other. I mean, that's an awesome example, and I guess we could if we stay in sort of this area of autonomy for a moment. One of the ones that popped out is on my list here to ask about is the bridging technology, the autonomous bridging
Yes.
technology, and here, and you can, run with this. Basically, it's a really cool autonomous way to set up a bridge, and that soldiers don't have to be involved in up front, so it can be remotely maneuvered and all that. And this is neat. And again, we've touched on autonomy from sort of different angles, and we have Admiral Selby on a couple of years ago from ONR talking about all the small craft autonomous systems and stuff they were developing there. Talk about this. Why I think this is just
Yeah.
another cool example of how autonomy is keeping our soldiers safe, and talk about it.
So for people who aren't familiar with it, bridging operations where you have to lay a bridge across a river is one of the most dangerous things that we ask our soldiers to do. It involves multiple soldiers right now having to connect bays of what we call the improved ribbon bridge, or IRB, together, and then other soldiers sitting in boats to hold it in place. We can do this safely in disaster relief situations where a bridge is down and we need to in place one. But in future conflict, it is not survivable to ask our soldiers to do that under fire.
Sure.
They won't survive. We have to figure out a way to do this autonomously. The challenge is the Army does not have the budget to just go build a whole new ribbon bridge, right? So we took on the project of, well, is there a way to retrofit the current ribbon bridge with autonomy to make it happen? And we had a company that came in with a proposal that essentially said, yes, we think we can do it. So they were going to redesign the connectors so that they're, one, they can be connected autonomously, but two, even if autonomy failed, it would be easier for soldiers to connect. So maybe we wouldn't need as many out on that bridge. And then ultimately try to put autonomy on the bridge so it could maneuver into place. In December, we had a demo at Fort Hood. So once again, we have incredible support from the engineers at Fort Hood, as well as PM Bridging, people that ultimately own the ribbon bridge. They sent a bridge to this company,
Okay.
sent a 7-bay ribbon bridge. So the company actually got to modify a real bridge. And we put it on a lake at Fort Hood. And we said, how's it going? They definitely made progress, and also definitely learned a lot of valuable lessons the first time you try to put this bridge on the water and attach things autonomously. And we're on a lake, so there's not waves, there's not current, but that's still very different than trying connectors on dry land. And we're excited to see where it continues to go.
And another really interesting one, and because we started off talking about biotech and medicine and things of this nature, is the casualty care training,
Yeah.
XR, mixed reality technologies. And again, this fits nicely into we've done a couple shows on this principle of the austere environment, and how we get things or get information. A lot of We've talked about the golden hour of survivability and all that. And I know there's several industry partners here that are involved in
Yeah.
everything from software to the XR, to the different sort of virtual technologies that go with the 3D systems. Again, take us into this. Is another really cool sort of
Yeah.
near-term thing that can be deployed.
So this is really interesting. When the project started, the way the project started was, if you take a look at casualty rates from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, women had disproportionately higher fatality numbers for
Mm.
things like gut wounds compared to their male counterparts. And one of the thoughts that the medical community had at the time was that this was because women's vital signs and the pattern of signals a woman's body gives off, say blood pressure, heart rate, etc., is actually radically different than males. And we were only training to male standards. So we started thinking, all right, we're going to go build like a female combat mannequin. We're going to do this female combat training. And as we continue to do research, we realized that the way we train our medics in the Army, it's actually really hard to do, like, to model continuity of care. How do you go from the medic and you keep transferring to higher echelons of care using the same system? And the answer was, we needed a solution. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
So we went out to do that. Once again, when you take a look at this problem, everything from building mannequins, modularity for, say, wound packs or other types of injuries, the XR, the comms, all of those things, you're not going to find one company that's best in breed across the board on all of them. So we put a bunch of companies on contract and said, please do that which only you do best. Bring your special sauce to this. So we have 6 companies working together to build a completely integrated system. We actually just had a touch point at Joint Base San Antonio with the medics yesterday that went incredibly well. And excitingly for me, one of the companies on that project actually just got a contract with NATO to work with European forces, as well as a contract with a NATO allied state to help train Ukrainian medics. So as we continue to develop and refine the capability for the Army, our allies are already using it in its current state, which I think is a real testament to that company and its work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Casey, one other one, and this one, we've done several quantum computing shows. I don't what I could say about quantum hardening, but again, this is it mentioned this is post quantum. So I don't even know what happens after quantum, but I assume it's really it seems like on the tech readiness spectrum, this one's kind of. But anyway, I mean, what's post quantum
Sure.
all about? What happens after we do the quantum stuff?
So the idea is right now we have a concern that our traffic, our data,
Yeah,
could be being harvested with the
sure.
idea that even though it's encrypted now, one day when there is quantum encryption, they will be able to decode that data. So we want to prepare for a post-quantum world to continue to protect our data against the ability of, a quantum computer to, say, decode it. And
Mm.
believe it or not, there's actually products in the commercial market that are already thinking about this and doing this that just needed to be adapted to the military network and the military use case. So this was a little bit more basic science. These guys did not go out with a unit. I sometimes joke some of our projects require scientist touch points, not soldier touch points. And this was definitely one of the scientist touch point ones. So we worked really closely with the Army's C5ISR Center in Maryland. And we put a company on. They went out to one of our big network exercises. Their first year, like they'd just been on contract, learned a lot. They spent the next year really working towards what this could look like, all the changes they're going to have to make to accommodate the Army network. And then they went back out, I think it was in September, back to NetModX, that big Army network exercise, and had a really successful demonstration. So looking forward to see, where that goes next. That's off of our plate now. It's gone over to a transition partner. But really cool example of how you can pivot something that commercial industry is doing into the Army decently quickly, and for not a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because you mentioned, of course, the topic of sort of making sure that companies you work with don't have any adversaries in, the venture capital funds, whatever they invest in them, or that they may be limited partners and all that. So clearly, some of these organizations, they have private money. You're investing as well per the performance report. And then, obviously, there's these SBIRs and all that. Does AAL, at any point sort of think like a sort of a traditional venture capitalist here and one type of return here, or is this kind of
Yes.
talk a little bit of how that works? Because when you think about the SBIRs, okay, we want to make sure you're doing something, but we're not looking for whatever 10 times our money and all that bit. But how do you think about
when I do an SBIR, I am absolutely looking for return on investment.
Cool.
So one of the things we do for all of our projects is we build a military business case. If you think
Okay.
back to corporate world, you have the equation, I think it is profit equals revenue minus cost.
Yeah.
We've developed a military one where it's military utility, or the return on investment is the military utility for the cost. So before we start every project, I ask the guys and the gals on the team, all right, what do you think this is going to do? Is this going to increase our standoff by X amount? Is this going to be able to push a capability to a lower echelon at lower cost? Is this going to improve the operational readiness rates of our vehicles by 5%? Is this going to improve medic performance scores by whatever? Okay. So we quantify that up front. And I tell them, I don't care if we miss the mark. If we say this capability is going to improve the operational readiness rates of vehicles by 20% and we only make 16, nobody is going to crush us. So don't say it's only going to improve it by 5% because you want to double or triple it. Like, I'm not going to invest in that, right? Got to give me what we really think the ROI on this is going to be. So we think about that up front, and then every quarter we monitor the progress of all of our companies and all of our projects towards meeting that. If companies are doing really great, are we going to maybe double down? Is there co-investment we need? Do we need a senior leader to maybe go out and see it? If you're not doing so well, is there a point at which we're going to cut off investment because it's just clearly not working? So we definitely think like return on investment. We also do have very close relationships with venture capitalists here. We have a network of about 250 that are interested in investing either in defense tech, dual use tech, or maybe like power and energy, human performance, autonomy, some of the areas that we touch. And when any of the companies in our portfolio are raising, if they let us know and they let us know the terms, we'll certainly send it out to our network. And that has led to due diligence and investments. It also means that we very carefully monitor the amount of venture capital our companies get, both from a return on investment, standpoint to prove to the government if we're providing value, but also because every time they raise, we do another quick look, just adversarial capital wise, to make sure everything is still good. One of the numbers I'm proudest of is that since coming on contract with us, our companies have raised $2.8 billion from private industry. Now, some of those are very small, like $1 million seed rounds. Some of those are $400+ million, late venture capital round raises. It doesn't matter. That means for every government dollar I've spent, it's about $13 to $14 of venture capital money into these companies. And that is definitely a number we keep our eye on closely.
Awesome. Going back to the the broad agency announcements, and clearly the thematic focus here is extremely broad. And I think one thing I saw in there, one of the lines that mentioned human performance, and this got me not just thinking of obviously where we started our discussion in terms of your interest in the human brain and cognition and all that, but we also a couple of years ago profiled the Air Force Research Labs and their iNeurals program on this sort of the ways we can enhance how a pilot learns to fly a certain jet faster and all that bit. Any cool things you can mention about human performance? And obviously if this club is classified, then we'll just move on. But I love this really theme, and I'm interested just personally in sort of whether they call it super soldier stuff or not. Really interested in human performance in general.
We don't really do classified work because the bulk of the companies that come to us don't have security clearances. So we never do a surrogate. We can do a surrogate solicitation. We've never done one. We do have a couple of projects that we think could go classified pretty quickly, but we make sure that doesn't happen for 6 to 12 months. And we already start working with the company on how do you get a SCIF or get access to one? How do you get clearances? Who's going to hold those for you? We've had to navigate sometimes companies needing access to like a number that's classified, and like how do we go get them that number to hold in their head? But that's what we're here for. We're like Sherpas for these companies. So we're here to help them work through all those things. On the human performance side, there is a program in the Army called the Holistic Health and Fitness Program. It's designed to help evaluate the fitness of our soldiers far beyond just their PT test scores, but look at everything from like sleep to nutrition to their spiritual health. When you think about how you monitor this, at least my mind goes to professional athletes and the professional athlete management software that a lot of our pro sports teams use to track all of the same things about their people. So we did a project where we tried to pivot commercial athlete management software into the DoD. Once again, this theme of let's embed you as soldiers, we put 3 companies on contract. They each spent 2 months with the 82nd Airborne, who loves physical fitness a whole lot. The 513th MI Brigade at Fort Gordon, who loves physical fitness a little bit less. And then our medics that were going through their advanced individual training at Joint Base San Antonio, who probably like physical fitness even less than our MI guys. And the
Mm.
idea was we wanted a solution that would work for everybody, no matter how much you loved doing your PT. And everybody kind of had the same reaction on the software that they thought was best. And it is one that was used by some professional sports teams. So that company ultimately went on. They got about a $4.5 million contract to do stress testing and get their ATO and all that. They recently got another $3.5 million contract to deploy it out to 8 brigades in the coming year.
Nice.
So a great example of how iterating with soldiers early really helped develop a great capability that is still going strong, 2 years past us, and, also great for this non-traditional small business, right? That's
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
We've also built buildings for the holistic health and fitness program, or we're trying to help them figure out how to build buildings, wide-span structures for far less cost, so we can help create spaces for units to really do this. So when I say we literally work on everything, I have now talked to you about things that go bang and boom, buildings, human performance, post-quantum, encryption protection. I literally mean everything,
Yeah.
except, there's an except, if it requires FDA approval, which is
Yeah.
rather ironic given my background. But
Right.
our remit is that things need to be out of our hand in 3 years or less. 2 is better than 3, 1 is better than 2. FDA approval timelines do not work on, 12 months or even 36 months.
That's
So
true.
unless you're coming to us with FDA approval, or you're like already got your, had your IND meetings and are well on the way, even then you're probably not in our wheelhouse. We're gonna hand you over to MRDC, help you find the right home there.
Got it. That makes sense. Makes a lot
And
of sense.
MRDC is the Medical Research and Development Command.
It,
Sorry, I used an acronym. Bad
no, it's
Casey.
cool. It's
I owe
yeah.
25 cents to the acronym jar.
Yeah, I mean, again, you clearly do everything, and it's an extremely impressive portfolio that you've been at. Just it hasn't been very long that you've been leading this, so I mean, it's really impressive. At the same time, I mean, because you're not just hanging out in Austin. I mean, I was just took a look last year. You're at all sorts of really cool sounding conferences. Loitering Munitions USA Defense and Security Conference. You were at the Royal United Service Institute Land Warfare Conference.
That one. Yeah.
What I mean, talk a little about you. I mean, obviously you get out there, you're learning from all our allies and your colleagues in the field. What's coming up in terms of 2026 in terms of you on that network in terms of I get doing the due diligence and finding out what the next exciting stuff is that you want to get involved in.
So a couple of things. One, the RUSI conference, the Royal United Service Conference. I wanna give kudos to our British colleagues.
Yeah.
They put on this they, along with RUSI, who is a big defense think tank in Britain, put on this incredible conference. And they did a panel that was myself talking about all the lessons we've learned, a banker, and a member of their own army talking about the challenges they were having. And their chief of staff of the army sat in the front row and essentially heard what they were doing wrong, or what they were doing suboptimally, or where things weren't working, and took notes, and actually said the lessons he learned from the banker that sat on the panel with me were one of his big 3 takeaways of the conference. I've never heard a chief of staff of the army think in those terms, talk in those terms, be willing to expose himself and the officers in his army to this type of thinking on such a broad level. So huge kudos to them. For one, thank you for inviting me. I felt massively out of place. Two, just really huge kudos that that's one of the big topics that they're thinking through. Obviously this year, as the US Army is thinking through things like acquisition reform, how do we move faster? Obviously it's something everybody is really interested in here as well. So I am excited to see that. We do a lot of work with our allies and partners, mainly the Australians, the British, and the Canadians, our Five Eyes partners, along with NATO. There are some countries, like Australia, that have versions of AAL. Their version is called RICO, specifically on the robotics front, that are doing incredible work. And we like to trade companies and best practices, and like, hey, have you seen this? Or hey, don't. I tried the thing. Don't try that. The Brits also have a pretty robust infrastructure as well, with their J-Hub and their Defense Innovation Unit over there. Other countries are starting to follow suit. The Italians are building a version, like an AAL Defense Innovation Unit like thing. The Finns are really leaning forward as well. The Poles are really interested in how they mobilize their domestic industrial base. And certainly I think with everything that's going on in NATO and NATO countries upping their contributions to defense, it's going to be something that increases more and more. We're always happy to help out our international partners. We had some members from the State Department, in our space yesterday talking about how we could maybe do this. So that's something we're always game for and game to do. What is coming up in 26? We've got a lot of cool things. We've started this project called Project Overwatch in conjunction with the Army's X-Tech Search program. We have 20 companies that are going to be spending the next 12 to 18 months embedded with 1st Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, incorporating mission autonomy there. We're also working with some other Army units on command and control problems. We're taking a look at some novel munitions because, munitions used to be the purview of the primes. With the start of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, we're seeing a lot of startups, non-traditionals, really trying to tackle things and change the paradigm. But, navigating fuse approvals, fuse safety board approvals, test boards, test range access, because you can't really find a commercial test range that's going to let you shoot something really high, really far with a 30-pound warhead on it. Are things we're super involved in. And for me personally, I actually leave the lab this summer. I'll have been here for 8 years. I'll have been the director for about 3. But my husband is going to go command a brigade. So we are moving on, and I am super excited for who the next command team of AAL is going to be, and all the work that they are going to do.
Very cool. We'll have to do a follow-up, and
absolutely.
That's exciting, and a little scoop here, but that's cool, and it'll be cool to see what your next piece of the puzzle is. But I'm again, it's amazing what you put together. I'm excited for you and the team. One last thing I got to ask about. I mentioned it in the bio, but before I got on the call today, I listened to you. It was called Angel's Carol, and you were playing a harp with the Western New York Children's Chorus, singing song "If Angels Could Sing," song of the season. Are you producing more? Are you getting out there and performing? What's happening on the harp front?
What's happening on the harp front? I have a kid. I have a toddler. And I'm actually solo parenting this year because my husband is doing an unaccompanied tour. So harp has taken a backseat right now. But I am the poster child for I am a better scientist when I am playing a musical instrument. Because if something isn't working in the lab, whether that be the bench top in my bench days or now, like, why isn't this thing not working? Why is this message not hitting? Or why are we having a technical problem with this project? You can go play harp for a little while and not think about it, and it somehow works its way out into your brain. I have been fortunate enough to play with an incredible number of orchestras. I've been fortunate enough to play like the full Nutcracker Ballet in a pit orchestra like 35, 40 times. I've been fortunate enough to record new music, and as you mentioned, actually be on a recording that was nominated for some Grammys, though we did lose to the Vienna Boys Choir, and probably deservedly so. I love Western New York Children's Choir. I sang in it. Mr. Fleischman is an incredible musical director, but like, we're not the Vienna Boys Choir, guys. They are one of one standout. But yeah, I love harp. We still have it. My daughter is 3. She is taking cello. And my promise to her is that when she is finally ready to play Twinkle Twinkle, mommy will learn the piano accompaniment on the harp, and we will play duets for as long as it is doable for the piano part to be played on the harp. So that is what I have to look forward to harp-wise, is playing with my daughter.
No, that's awesome. And I have to say, listening to it was very soothing and relaxing.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad.
I enjoyed it. I don't, I'm not, I don't know much about music other than how to turn the radio on. But it was I very much enjoyed it. So it's just another testament to your amazing array of skills, Casey. But no, it's again extremely impressive. I look forward to continue to follow you, the team, everything, and what comes next for you as well. But really impressive work. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Dr. Casey Perley, Executive Director, Army Applications Laboratory. We'll put all the links in the show notes, but doing really amazing work, as they say, create the world's best technology for the best Army in the world. Casey, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while today about everything you have going on. Thank you for what you do, not just in developing these technologies, but in keeping our country safe. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better and safer tomorrow for all of us via what you do. Really a great story, and I look forward to continue to follow your work.
Thank you so much for having me on. This has been so much fun.
Really great having you.